Hello and welcome. I'm Chris Wallace, and I welcome you to the 2020 presidential debate. I'm going to be your moderator. No, that's not right at all. Hello, I'm Chris Moyer, and welcome to Zpryme Now. Today, we are going to have a really heartfelt and difficult discussion. Americans in 2020 and people around the world are facing tremendous challenges due to the pandemic that calls for an immediate action. The electric utility and energy industry has a fantastic opportunity to connect with their customers, change business practices, and make a true impact in their community on a variety of different fronts, from climate change to social justice and improving economic opportunity. And to do this requires a great degree of planning, sensitivity, and strategic forethought. To discuss some of the biggest challenges facing our society and our industry right now, I am so pleased to be joined by three absolute luminaries in the industry, and I promise that I will not cut them off at any time during their conversation. My first guest is MaryAnne Brelinsky, EDF Energy President in North America. MaryAnne, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm excited to be here, Chris. Thanks.
We are also joined by Phil Nevels from Exelon. He is Exelon Utilities. He is the Director of Innovation and Partnerships with Exelon. Phil, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me.
And last but certainly not least, my dear friend, all of you are my dear friends, but Dr. Massoud Amin from the University of Minnesota. Massoud, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Honored to be here.
It's our honor at Zpryme, and as we formulated this discussion and some of the work that really moves us as we come out of our virtual ETS the last couple of weeks, we were thinking about some of the great steps that forward-looking utilities are taking to tackle these significant challenges. And as we looked at what many utilities are doing, there seem to be three pillars that really stood out to us, and those are inclusion, community, and resiliency. And that point of inclusion really takes a broad-based perspective around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Community focuses on providing clean energy resources for everyone of all economic backgrounds. And then resiliency expands on the idea of that time-honored tradition at utilities of reliability and looks at the question of how can we prevent outages from happening? How can we harden our grid to prevent cyber attacks, physical attacks? And how can we make sure that we turn the power back on quickly when incidences happen? So those are the three pillars that MaryAnne, Phil, Massoud, and myself are going to be formulating much of this discussion around. But we're going to take a look at it kind of headline by headline. And as I promised our fantastic panelists, there are no easy softball questions here. There are no easy headlines. And the first headline that we're going to discuss came from the New York Times recently, and they had an interactive story on climate migration and the impact that climate change is having on America right now, but could have on America over the next 30 to 70 years, the rest of this century. And so I want to, immediately throw us into the fire here. And MaryAnne, as we think about the impact of climate change, how can we focus our thoughts on climate change to be proactively making the changes that we need to right now so that we might not have to face the worst of this climate migration crisis in the future?
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, softball question. I read the New York Times article that you're referring to, and it talked a lot about our coastal towns, our impact from severe storms. Resiliency was a topic that came up, and I know when I hear the word resiliency, and maybe it's because I've grown up in the power industry, I see transmission lines in my head. And I think even from a very personal perspective, I mean, I moved because of what you could possibly perceive as climate change. My husband and I started out living in Kemah, Texas. So right on the Gulf Coast, our house was at 6 feet above sea level. And when my children were 3, 3, and 1, Hurricane Rita was barreling down and Category 5 targeted. And if it had gone where they had predicted, the house would have been leveled. And it was in that moment that I thought, I cannot be getting my babies out of their cribs in the middle of the night. I need to get farther away from shore. So I think all of us who are in the industry are thinking about greenhouse gases and reducing emissions and renewable integration, all things that are near and dear to our industry's heart, and something that is happening. The disruption from those forces is happening to us in real time and moving at a faster pace. I don't think it's linear. I think it's going to be exponential in the way it impacts our industry. But once it hits your home and becomes personal, I think that's when you start seeing real permanent change. And you could argue that moving to the north side of Houston wasn't maybe far enough. But it's surrounding us. And I have my twins are now freshmen in college, both ended up at great universities in Colorado. And just this morning, one called and said, well, I left my window open last night to keep cool. And now all of my clothes in my room smells like campfire smoke. And so you start thinking, okay, well, it's not just the shores, it's the wildfires. It is impacting all of us, whether you live in Colorado or New York or Texas. And I think one of the big challenges of our time is going to be how we as an industry create purposeful, meaningful change in a way that brings all of us along. And it can't just be leaving, the poorer communities behind or the less able to deal with picking up the house and moving to the north side of town. Not everybody can just do that. So how do we think about it from both the macro, how is it impacting the world and the earth, all the way to our communities that we serve, and making sure that we create opportunities for us to address everyone's needs created.
Well, thank you, MaryAnne. And I did turn to you first because you do live in one of those potentially climactic impacted zones. And you brought up so many great points, and we are definitely going to turn back and touch on the socioeconomic challenges throughout this conversation. But one of two of those other key points that you brought up that I think is so important to emphasize is, here we are. It is September 30th. There is still a month left in the North Atlantic hurricane season, and we have already run out of letters of the alphabet for named storms this year. We have now moved on to the Greek alphabet to name the rest of the storms that we will have. At the same time, across the country, from Washington to California, Colorado and other parts of the West are on fire right now. And as you so rightly pointed out, this is not just a linear progression of bad impacts. This is going to be something that it could have exponential increase in devastation. So now I'm going to turn to my fellow northern Midwestern guests here, and as we live in as the New York Times article pointed out, areas that benefit from climate migration. Phil, you work at Exelon, and Exelon has operations across many coastal urban areas, but you sit in Chicago. What are some of your thoughts and some of Exelon's thoughts when it comes to innovation and tackling climate change?
That's a big question. I think one of many things we need to do is the actions that we're consumers of business need to be more closely tied to the carbon effects of those activities. There's something I don't know if my co-founder of Power to Switch is on as an attendee right now, but something we used to talk about when we had our company was salience. And we used to talk about it in terms of why don't more people switch their retail provider when there's plenty of them out there that are cheaper than the one that they're currently getting their energy supply from. And one of the issues is so you look at a gas station and you've got the prices of the gasoline right up there, so people know the price, even if it doesn't make that much big of a difference to them economically, going from $2.89 a gallon to $2.86. They're still going to go to the lower cost energy source because they know what it is, and everyone just visceral reaction to paying more for a commodity than someone else. And so I think the same thing applies to carbon. We don't know what the carbon impacts are of the many different things that we're doing, and so we don't factor that into our decision making. And so much of what we're doing on the innovation side at Exelon is innovating in terms of both policy and technology. Policy side, it's how do we think about the investments that the utility is making in terms of the carbon savings that it creates. Electrification, vehicle electrification is a perfect example of that. For every electric vehicle we're putting on the road, we're reducing the amount of carbon that would have been emitted by equivalent ICE vehicle. So how is the utility on the policy side, how is the utility then able to leverage that value as an incentive, as an example, that we can provide to a consumer to purchase that electric vehicle? On the technology side, we're looking, of course, at new technologies that consumers in their home or at businesses can deploy to either to save energy at their home or to be more efficient, thus reducing carbon. And also, what incentives can we provide there to support the purchase of those technologies that are based on those carbon savings and the value that's created? But for any of those to be successful, I think carbon just has to be more and more part of the conversation. Mechanisms have to be in place to make it a more prominent feature of our day-to-day lives and the impact that comes out of the things that we're doing on a daily basis.
Well, thank you, Phil. Dr. Amin, Massoud, you've heard MaryAnne and Phil sort of eloquently and passionately lay out the why and some of the how we will tackle climate change. What else can we add to that? What else can you add to this discussion?
Thank you, Chris. For a long time, we as a nation have ignored confronting these tough issues, and we have politicized it, when in reality science. And as a nation, it behooves us to focus on science. Many times science isn't 0 or 1, but it gives you some level of understanding of where we are. As MaryAnne said, and as Phil said, this is exponential. It's not a linear change, it's a complex dynamical system. So what I would like to point to, I have had the privilege of predominantly working in 2 sectors of our economy: defense, from 1982 to 1997, and the utilities from 97 forward. My whole family, as well as my former colleagues at EPRI, they are all in California, and they are victims, they have fallen victim to the fires that we're experiencing there. I've seen pictures from my former boss's window in San Francisco, how close fires are, or my family in Sacramento and elsewhere. I'd like to bring up 2 issues, something that MaryAnne touched on, which is on resilience, another one on the policy, not politics, but policy, sound policy that Phil brought up, and finally, leadership. So on the resiliency, I've worked on resilient systems, helicopters, aircraft, power grids, societies, buildings. And there's also resiliency is about human psychology. And actually, University of Minnesota, post-World War II, psychology department pioneered study of resiliency in children. What is it that some children go through hard times, but they grow up to be well-adjusted adults? Less than a mile from my home, where I'm speaking to you from, George Floyd was killed. Our society hasn't healed, will never heal. That recovery from such events are very hard, but how do you move forward? How do you bring inclusivity and a brighter, more trusted leadership to conflict and to divides. And it boils down to several factors. I kind of jump a little bit. Many people are going through job insecurity, have lost their jobs. And as we get more and more information that companies are downsizing, we are reading about United Airlines by October 1st is going to lay off so many employees. We have read articles that, thanks to you and Mark who shared it, resilient employees would survive and continue to work effectively and stay not only survive but thrive. They try to find meaning out of it. And the attitudes that help with that, I would call them, this is Massoud's summary of that, is 3 C's: commitment, control, and challenge. Having commitment to a greater vision, number 1. Having some degree of control over smaller things rather than giving up, remaining involved and not giving up, and trying to discover how you together with others can grow through the stress, that challenge, rather than bemoaning our fate and giving up. So that's on the resiliency side. On the policy side, this has become too politicized. We need to go back to square one together and check our politics at the door, check our egos at the door, and as Americans, focus on what do we know, what we don't know, and what are the pathways forward. It's not just about hundreds of millions of climate refugees that we read about in the article, but it's affecting, you would think Minnesota, Michigan, Dakotas are safe. No, we have 15,000 lakes. We don't know when, but they can become puddles because of climate change. These lakes can dry up. So only thing I would add are those 3 things: resiliency, ability to build trust based on science, based on what we know, and having that common ground, and better policy, sound policy that is supportive of that transformation, that change, gradual change. My hat is off both sectors that I have worked on, including utilities and defense. They focus on a mission, keeping the lights on or serving the security of our nation. So my hat is off to the to the system operators and the colleagues on this call that are doing that under increased stress and strain, being hit by multiple factors. And I better stop there because I like to listen more to our colleagues. So I hope the 3 areas that I brought up make sense and adds to the discussion. Thank you.
Well, they certainly did, Massoud. The principles of Massoud, that's great. And it actually kind of really leads right into one of the next headlines that we're facing. And I do want to come back to this a little bit. We did have a great question from the audience. Peter Esposito asked a great question that speaks to something that Phil was specifically referencing in terms of carbon pricing and putting a mechanism around that. And we will get to that in our discussion. But your comments about the economic conditions that we're facing right now, Massoud, related to COVID-19 could not be more topical. And I'm going to turn this first question over directly to Phil, because our next headline comes from the Baltimore Sun. And it was from 2 days ago, and it says utilities can send shutoff notices to Maryland homes starting this week, but help is available. And that is in Exelon service territory. Baltimore Gas and Electric is one of the Exelon utility family of companies. But what Exelon is doing is sort of the natural response. You were a leader in terms of having shutoff moratoriums, but eventually the realities of business also do catch up. But there are many ways that we can help our customers. And Phil, talk to us a little bit about the moratorium process, and then also some of those steps that, whether it's ComEd or BGE or any of the other number of Exelon companies are doing to help customers.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. And I a bit of a side note, but related, there's a woman who was quoted in that article, Tamla Olivier, who's the chief customer officer for Baltimore Gas and Electric. And I should say that that role, chief customer officer, is a brand new role at all of our utilities. We have 6 utilities in our portfolio, 10 million customers, ComEd being the largest at 4 million, Baltimore having a large number of customers as well. And that role was created in recognition that our business needs to be customer centric. There's a point, I think it was made in this particular article, that utilities are unique in that our customers are everybody, literally everybody. There's not a single individual in any of our jurisdictions who doesn't use our product one way or the other. And that's very unique from any other type of company. Now, talking about the moratorium specifically, I think that we did across our fleet, we were proactive in offering a moratorium, not only on the disconnects, but moratorium on late payments. We even reconnected folks that had been disconnected. Moratorium isn't just about future disconnects. And I'll be honest, that certainly has a financial impact on the utility. It affects our free cash flow in the short term. And I don't think that you can have moratoriums indefinitely. I mean, eventually people have to pay for their electricity. But another thing that we're doing is even as some of those moratoriums are ending, they have ended in some of our jurisdictions. Baltimore Gas and Electric, I believe tomorrow the moratorium is ending. Then there are others that end later in October and even into November. Even as those end, we're ensuring that all of our customers have a period of time, it's a minimum of 12 months, to set up a payment plan to catch up on those payments. And we're doing a number of things in that regard. But where I want to go is those measures, even though they can't be indefinite, even if they needed to be extended in the short term, that cost and the short-term costs of doing these types of things is well worth it. And it's well worth it, and I may be getting long-winded here, cut me off any time, Chris. It's well worth it because the entire growth model of our organization is built on understanding what our customers need and want, and built on building and investing toward those customer needs. If we're not demonstrating to our customers that we're partners, not just a utility, a big bad utility up in the sky, but if we're not demonstrating to them that we're partners, then we'll never have a relationship where we can truly understand what the needs of our communities are. And we won't have credibility with our customers when we're telling them we have solutions for you. If we can't solve and help solve and walk alongside customers in solving basic needs of high quality power now in the short term, even if that means extending moratoriums, even if that means continuing to provide financial incentives to support customers now, they're going to remember that, and we're not going to be able to grow as an organization and make those investments and do those things in the future. So I'll stop there. I could go on and on and on, but I think moratoriums do utility absolutely worth it, the long-term viability of the utility and for the communities we serve.
Well, thank you, Phil. And no need to cut yourself off. I promised at the top of the conversation, I will not be monitoring the 2-minute time limit here on this. I think that the points that you were making are exactly right. The short-term pain as everyone is experiencing, and utilities taking the lead on this and saying, hey, customer, we care about you, and we want you to be able to shelter in place during this pandemic and not worry that you were going to lose power. It was absolutely just a wonderful thing to do. And at the same time, as we move forward into different stages of this economic recovery and economic crisis that we're in, new realities also need to take form. And I think that's a very reasonable plan to continue to work with customers. I want to bring MaryAnne back into the conversation and picking up on this idea. MaryAnne, what role do utilities have in making sure, and energy companies have in making sure that the customer is at the forefront of everything they do in terms of this economic recovery?
Yeah, I want to start by applauding Exelon and what they have done around their customer experience. I think when customers are loyal and they're engaged and feel like, okay, I'm being listened to, and I go back to in middle of March when the pandemic was really hitting us all, hard. The utility industry, I think, was one of the biggest unsung heroes of the pandemic. And, I don't say that lightly. I have a brother who runs an ICU in San Antonio. His wife is a nurse practitioner, ER doctor. So they were dealing with one aspect of the crisis. Meanwhile, our gas schedulers, our power dispatchers, our SCADA engineers, they were keeping the lights on and couldn't stay home, had to go out and be brave and tackle the unknown. And to Phil's point, I mean, can you imagine battling COVID and all of the uncertainty that was March and April and May and June in the dark? I mean, it would have been catastrophic for us as a country, as a race, to not have those resources available to us. So I think there were a lot of great unintended consequences of keeping the lights on for people. Back in March and April, students were sent home. They're trying to do remote learning. The divide between our students who need to be in school because maybe they don't have Wi-Fi at home or computers, to take away electricity and have that happen in the dark, I think would have been emotionally scarring for a generation of our young people. So it is important short term how we deal in the crisis. I think how we come out of this and deal with the long term implications of it, to Phil's point, you can't be free forever. There has to be some mechanism, safety net for our vulnerable classes, and at the same time a plan on how to deliver reliable energy as we move forward. So I do think the customer experience is critical. And to Phil's point, we all touch energy. I mean, there's no getting away from it. So it is incredibly important.
Well, that is so well said. As Maslow's hierarchy of societal needs, agriculture and food is paramount. Water, but even our food system requires electricity now, and so no other business is running without the utility business the way that it is. Not communications, not healthcare, not financial services. So really a fantastic tribute to the frontline workers that are at utilities. So thank you, MaryAnne. Massoud, as we think about the nexus of these two conversations, the long-term climate migration issue, the long-term climate change issue, and the current crisis from an economic perspective that we're in, is there an opportunity for utilities and for energy providers to be at the forefront of an economic revolution that provides better opportunity for customers, for economic growth, and then helps change to make sure that we can be at the forefront of what we need to tackle sustainable climate change issues?
Chris, thank you. The answer in short is yes. There are many. There are no single silver bullets, but I share with you a few that we can do, and it will generate economic growth, it will generate jobs, and it will also safeguard, minimize risk, if you will, manage risk due to multi-hazard, due to all hazard, whether it's a climate change, cyber attack, physical attack, terroristic attack, whatever it may be. Number one, we have ignored many facets. We have been so focused on short-term returns on this quarter, on next quarter, etc. That's necessary, that's essential, but it's sufficient. The question that was asked actually earlier connects to it. The father of modern management science, Peter Drucker, said, you manage what you measure. I add to it, if you price it, you manage it even better. Knowing what to measure, how often you measure it, what are the key indices is critical, but also pricing, putting numbers and value on that. Electricity is the linchpin of our economy, of our society, of our quality of life. Everything else, even we can run the power grid without communication, but communication cannot run without power grid. And we can go on and on, banking and finance and so on. So if we can communicate and build bridges in that area, a leader's ability to communicate effectively makes the difference between status quo and greatness. When we look at people like Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Franklin Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, or even President Reagan, being able to communicate at a very high level, having a greater vision, and having a team that aspires to that greater vision, we can enable a smarter, a more resilient, a more secure grid. Not just high voltage grid, but also exactly what we were talking about. If you think about them as Russian nested dolls, the example I've used before, what's the innermost doll? Customer, people. The reason we do what we do, if you step back and think about as engineers, as utility workers, why do we do what we do? It's provide light, refrigeration, quality of life to that innermost doll, to customers. So turn it around. What does, for social justice, for inclusivity, for community empowerment, and for resiliency from innermost doll to the big system, what are the characteristics that are needed? What are the technologies that we can have? And then match them from measures that we are talking about. For example, it's not just CO2 or SO2 or NOx. There's water, land usage. There are 9 factors when you decide what to do, where you're going to put the next small even power plants. Most of us get caught in one single measure. We don't value the rest of it. So my suggestion is have a holistic, systemic approach to utility investments for now, for the short term, as well as with the long-term view, with foresight. And that foresight has bands of uncertainty around it, that as we move forward, we can narrow the gap, we can get better and better at managing this. It's just like in some ways, it's easier than the stock market, that your band of uncertainty here is narrower, but it needs partnership between government and private sector and NGOs. I'm grateful that CARES Act committed in the article you mentioned about Baltimore, committed $19 million to support assistance, energy assistance. However, Baltimore Gas and Electric has already put $150 million to support. The key question is what's going to happen tomorrow, October 1st, when these run out. And there are about 22 states and Washington, D.C. that have memorandums, moratoriums, if you will, on utility shutoffs in response to pandemics. You turn it back to say, what can we do to manage these resources better so that that innermost doll is empowered? And it boils down to really leadership. And leadership is we use that word a lot, like we use innovation a lot. It's about empathy, it's about resilience, it's about communication, it's about openness, it's about mental, emotional quotient, impulse control, it's about spiritual quotient, having a true north. It's about self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation to aspire to a higher and have practical, not just aspiration. Aspiration without plan is daydreaming. And then having social skills and focus on results, build the trust, And the two colleagues who are on the call have those qualities. They have manifested those qualities and many across the utilities. So I have very high hopes for the future of our industry that we can and we must do this. Do short term, but let's focus on longer term that can satisfy this, not just this or, but this and. Security, resilience, job creation, economic growth, and getting to new areas, getting to areas that we all know, such as total DC buildings, total DC homes, electrification of transportation, using electricity is a toolmaker's dream. It brings the precision for manufacturing, for advanced manufacturing. Disturbance-free electrons are the lifeblood of enabling advanced manufacturing. So I better stop here because I have gone on too long. If interested, I can dig into any of those areas as you see fit. Thank you.
Well, the purpose of this conversation really is to dig into some of these questions, and we can't solve them all right now, but I appreciate all of you taking the time to really thoughtfully explore these really, really difficult topics. And before we move on to our next, and I promise everybody, it's going to be another controversial, difficult topic, I do want to take a moment to address our friend of the show, Peter Esposito's question about a carbon reduction strategy. And really quickly, to frame it into a short either-or kind of statement, are tax credits the right strategy, or should we just or should we put a price on carbon and let that do the trick, or is there a third way to handle that? And I'll throw it to Massoud first. Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to speak like an attorney or an economist.
Well, that'll be perfect for Peter because he is a good attorney.
Yeah. There you go. On the one hand is this, on the other hand like that. I have wanted to really meet a one-armed economist or a one-armed lawyer so they can tell me, boom, this is the answer. There is no such simple answer. So David, thank you for your question. It's actually both. We got to have pricing on carbon, as I alluded to it. Peter Drucker said it, you measure it, you manage it. Yes, we measure CO2, SO2, NOx, and other greenhouse gases that MaryAnne talked about. But if you price it, it's essential. And it's not a punishment on the industry. Bring the industry in. Then I was at EPRI. We brought in 1998 from nuclear power 148 stakeholders to develop technology strategy roadmap in 1998. To this day, that roadmap from 98 is still valid. We updated it in 2003 before I left EPRI, called Electricity Sector for the Future. ESFF. That one is still valid. Everything, we didn't do it. We are not some geniuses. We listen to stakeholders. They range from nuclear power builders to Greenpeace. You build such a capability, you listen to people, as opposed to me being a talking head, waving my hand. So you need to do both. There are technologies. Carbon capture and sequestration, as you know, it reduces efficiency of coal. Coal power plants are about 35, 38% efficient. You put carbon capture on it, it's going to reduce efficiency. It takes electricity, energy to capture the carbon. It reduces the efficiency by another 1/3. So instead of getting the money for having 35, 38% electrons coming out, you're going to reduce it to about 27, 26%. So there should be a way for cost recovery. There should be incentives. So I would use both incentives for moving in that direction and transitioning in the process to cleaner, less polluting source of electricity. At the same time, we have lobbies for coal. We have seen congressmen from certain states yelling, drill, baby, drill, and I've been in those meetings. So how do you bring them along? So the job training, retraining, is really a societal change. The same way TVA, Bonneville, BPA were created. We are talking about big, hairy, audacious goals. But it can be done if you build it with trust, having all stakeholders transparently participate, provide input, and have trust in you and in the process. The second part is pricing. So it's really both. So on the one hand, do use technologies for carbon capture while transitioning it and having incentive to transition. On the other hand, have the stick, which is putting a gradual, similar to what Japanese did or Germans did for making design, in the industrial ecology, design for the environment. It's a principle that you build a refrigerator or a TV. How do you design it so that everything in that is recyclable? Everything that comes out of it doesn't end up in some dump, but you can reuse it and recycle it. That can be done in the coal and energy sectors that are polluting considerably, including, by the way, transportation. So I better stop there. I can end up talking about this for another 40 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Did that make sense, by the way? David, did that make sense?
That makes great sense. Phil, and anything to add to this conversation on what's the right path? Phil?
I'll jump in real quick. First, say totally agree with the professor. If you measure it, what gets measured, what gets done. Put a price tag on it. People will pay attention. I would add that as a power generation industry, I think we've done a really good job of reducing carbon emissions. And it's been a couple years since the power generation segment historically was the largest producer to where now it's transportation. And I think the next big move as an industry that we can do is around the transportation sector and find ways to make electric vehicles commonplace in the country, long haul vehicles. So again, I think our industry is uniquely positioned to help transportation significantly reduce the emissions.
And I will say to that, that's a great point. Transportation is number one. I sit in Detroit. We have so many great folks working on electric vehicles right now, and not just in the big three, but OEMs around the world. One of the key motivating factors right now spurring electric vehicles are tax credits. That's not the only thing. Obviously, customer choice and great vehicles that are being produced by a variety of different manufacturers is a big draw as well. Phil, last word on this.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I want to share that we have worked on here at Exelon in the innovation category. And I agree with everything that everyone has said. Electrification of vehicles is the number one thing, and we're focused on that in a big way. Buildings are another large source of emissions, energy being consumed in buildings. And we had designed a project here in Chicago that was intended to create a mini market, a mini carbon market. But what was unusual about it is it was based on energy efficiency. And so the idea is that a small business would purchase an energy efficient appliance, and then we would equate that energy efficiency, the kilowatt hours saved by that appliance, to carbon saved, and we will create an energy efficiency attribute. Not dissimilar from a REC on the generation side, but this is now an attribute being created based on not consuming electricity. With that attribute, we would stand up a market where larger corporations in the Chicagoland area could purchase that attribute and bid on that attribute based on community support or sustainability goals that they had. Those dollars could then go back into a fund that would allow small businesses to purchase additional energy efficiency appliances and the like. And so I think when you talk about a carbon tax or any kind of tax, and taxes maybe, that's a scary word. Another question is, what do you do with that money you collect? And I think it makes the most sense for that money to go back into, in an evergreen sort of way to continuing to support carbon reduction in our jurisdictions, whatever that looks like.
Taxes are a big, scary word, but I think that's a great place to put a pin on that discussion. And And thank you, Peter, for that great question, spurring this increased discussion. We've got 15 minutes left. Time is just flying by, and we have probably one of our most critical and difficult conversations still yet to tackle. And it comes from a recent headline in the Indy Star, and it starts with a quote: "Those rooms couldn't be more white. Lack of diversity in utilities could hurt customers." And this is a really critical conversation. And I am a rapidly approaching middle-aged white guy. I know that there is so many more things that I need to learn about this. But I'm going to turn the conversation first over to Phil. That quote comes from the CEO of Citizens Energy Group, which is in Indiana and Indianapolis, and that is Jeffrey Harrison. But Phil, you work for a fantastic leader in Calvin Butler, who I just had the opportunity to interview. But what more can we be doing to bring greater diversity to our industry?
Yeah, no, Chris, that's a great question. And I will say that, let me talk about Exelon for a second. The things that have been happening just in our society with African-American populations and with the police, George Floyd in particular, the positive that has come out of that, and at least at Exelon, I can speak for Exelon, is that it has opened up the door for us to have more of these very, very hard conversations. This race and gender and all these things, very, very hard to talk about. I argue about it with my wife. So having those conversations in the workplace with your colleagues, very, very difficult thing to do. And so one of the silver linings of all that has gone on is we've been having really frank conversations at Exelon to many of our leaders, and I didn't have the pleasure of participating in this. Many of our leaders at Exelon recently had the opportunity to participate in a workshop that was run by an organization called White Men and Allies. And the premise behind that, and maybe some on this call are familiar with that, the premise behind that is that in order for us to advance this topic, in order for us to get more people of color, women, in any underrepresented group into more positions of leadership at corporations and nonprofit sector, wherever, it really requires the involvement and participation of those who are in power and who have the lion's share of influence at the moment. And those are white males. And there's no way around that. And it can be uncomfortable to say that. And I don't say that in a way to blame white men or to shame them or to have them think that the entire solution to that problem is on their shoulders. But at a minimum, it requires their active participation. And so when I look at Exelon, done a great job at having diverse folks in our leadership. And Calvin Butler is probably the best example of that. He's the CEO of Exelon Utilities, and so he's my boss. And we have within the utilities, certainly, Tamla, I referenced earlier, Chief Customer Officer. In fact, the Chief Customer Officer at all of our utilities is either a person of color or female, or both, in every case across all 6 of our utilities. And there are others in the leader who are from underrepresented groups. Even with, I'd say we still have some work to do. If you go to our most senior levels and you look at our group there, that is predominantly white male. Even that has a lot more diversity, I think, than some other corporations. But we can always be doing better. And I don't have to go on and on about the value of diversity of all kinds, not just race, not just gender, but thoughts and ideas and backgrounds and solutions. We need diversity on every dimension. But maybe sum it up. The only way to really get there is to have full participation from everybody to ensure that we get there. You need full participation from everybody, and it's not enough. Last thing I'll say, it's not enough at corporations in particular to have a bunch of initiatives. It's really about the culture of the organization. When we in part of culture is when we do things right, there are incentives that are created. When we do things are wrong, there are disincentives for that. And one thing we could do right in corporations, as an example, is to have more mentorship. Let's mentor that next generation of leaders coming from those underrepresented groups, and let's leverage that as the core to building a culture that's focused on and serious about having diversity at the most senior levels of our organization. So it's a culture thing. It's not an initiatives thing. And I think we're doing a great job at Exelon.
Well, Zpryme certainly agrees with that Exelon is an industry leader in this regard, and not just an industry leader, but a leader across industries as well. Thank you for those comments. And one of the things that I want to pick up on as I turn this conversation next to MaryAnne is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just a black and white issue. This diversity, equity, inclusion is inclusive of different ethnic backgrounds, skin color, gender, LGBTQ, all types of different diversity of ideas. How can we make sure, what are some of the steps that EDF Energy is doing under your leadership, and how can we make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is paramount for our industry?
I think there's a couple of things, and my hat and my heart goes out to strong leadership who deal with these issues head on. It is wrong to stay silent. And a good friend of mine, who is an executive over at Sodexo, said, we're 2 weeks into George Floyd, and there's nothing on LinkedIn. It's impacting all of our businesses. Nobody's talking about it in a, how is this impacting our employees, our workforce, our culture? I think that the first step is acknowledging how it is impacting the suffering of our employees, and to, in a very empathetic, honest way, listen to what they need, because the different workforces and are going to require different things from their management teams and their leadership. So, one of the things we did immediately with the George Floyd specifically is identifying, okay, we have to talk about it. And I would normally, in a non-pandemic, get all of the employees into an auditorium in a town hall and have question and answer. And well, COVID, we couldn't do that. How do you create forums for people to be heard, to listen, and to say, you know what, at EDF, hate speech, that tone, language, this is a place for everybody to feel comfortable in their own skin, to be heard, and to know that they're supported. And just saying that is such a big opening for employees. I had more conversations fall out of that email blast that I sent immediately to my teams, and had real conversations. We immediately set up focus groups. We've got some HR people who are very passionate about finding ways for our employees to be heard and then take actionable steps. So I do think that there's a lot as an industry. And the first thing is, don't stay silent, address it. Everybody's talking about it, whether they're doing it in front of you or not, and really have an empathetic approach to how you're going to deal with what your employee base needs. And I think given the pandemic and the economic disruption and the social injustice all kind of happening, perfect storm events really created opportunities for strong leadership to rise above it and say, what can we do to help make meaningful change?
Well, thank you, MaryAnne. And we are nearing the end of time, and this conversation is not going to be fully and adequately addressed right now, unfortunately. But Dr. Amin, you live in Minneapolis, and Minneapolis obviously suffered this terrible tragedy as a community of George Floyd's murder. But this has happened all over the country, and in big towns and in small towns. It has just viscerally happened to you recently. Can you talk to us from your immigrant experience to your experience in Minneapolis right now? What are some of the steps that we can do to be more inclusive as an industry and society?
Thank you, Chris. I get teared up when I think about what happened to George Floyd and so many other people of color or minorities or women in our community. Minnesota is supposed to be a progressive, open state. And I was shocked, frankly, to see the underbelly that is there. In a sense, it has brought the ugliest part of racism, the ugliest part of prejudice to the limelight. If we step back and we look at genetic composition of humanity, you take somebody from northern part of Norway, somebody from Central Africa, Aborigine from Australia, genetically we are 99.997% the same. That 0.003, you know what that is? The part that doesn't matter. Due to 40,000 years of living in hot climate, our skin is more tanned. Our nose is wider because we need more oxygen, it's hot. Up north, our noses are narrower because it's cold. It has nothing to do with human potential, has nothing to do. However, we have an opportunity, and we should not, I agree with exactly what my two wonderful colleagues said. We should not let this killing, and many killings like this, these martyrs, go to waste. We should act. We should stand up. We should demand justice. As an immigrant, I was born in Tabriz, Iran, came to America before revolution. Race didn't exist in that sense. What mattered in Iran, the bias was almost like Brazil. What family do you come from? How much education you have? Iran is a remnant of what's left of an old empire. So we have folks who look like Mongols, Chinese. We have African American. That didn't matter. That didn't matter at all. So for me, I knew about it. I'd read a lot about America and so on. I knew, and especially civil rights movement. I was as a kid, I was just in shock by that. And my father, he had gone to Johns Hopkins and etc. He said, yeah, they told me, the bus driver stopped, came to the back of the bus. Sir, this is in 1951. Said, sir, you are not, use the N-word. You must sit in the front of the bus rather than the back of the bus. And I couldn't understand why they would do that to somebody. They pushed them to the back of the bus. So whether you're a person, you're different. People put you in a pigeonhole. With me, if they see me, I don't speak, they think I'm European. As soon as I speak or they see my name, they think I'm a Muslim Arab and put me in another pigeonhole. We all get hit in different ways. We are all, as Dr. King said, may have come on different ships, but we're in the same boat. And that diversity is like tapestry that can make our nation stronger. If we think about it, the different backgrounds, different gender, different experiences we have, when it comes to intelligence work, I can tell you, it gives you different perspective around the same issue. So that tapestry is woven, let's say, with gold, with silver, with copper, with all kinds of beautiful things within the fabric of our society. However, this is not new. We got to uplift 400 years of tyranny. 400 years of tyranny. And the best thing we can do is to listen. The best thing we can do is to listen, to understand. So I'm all ears to hear what my brothers and sisters of color, what those who have been wronged can say, have to say, listen, and try to understand, and then act on that. And don't forget it. Don't let this opportunity, maybe the first time since 1968, we have an opportunity to do something together for a better, for a most just, and humane society. God bless. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you all, MaryAnne, Phil, Massoud. What a privilege it was to have this conversation with all three of you. Thank you. And at Zpryme, we are so fortunate to be able to have these conversations, and there's been so much great dialogue on the chats and the Q&A, and I'm sorry that I couldn't get to every single point and question, but thank you so much for participating in this discussion. Zpryme over the next year is going to be embarking on a variety of benchmarking efforts to help facilitate this proactive change that's occurring in the utility industry, in the energy industry, benchmarking around sustainability, diversity, equity, inclusion, and community and economic workforce development. So please stay tuned for more of that efforts. We are so excited to be partnering with so many wonderful leading folks like the ones that we've had the opportunity to speak with today. Zpryme Now is a production of Zpryme Research. I'm Chris Moyer, and Zpryme Now has been produced by Chris Holt. Big thanks to Chris. We're so grateful for all of the wonderful participation. We hope that you have a safe and healthy rest of your day. Thank you so much.